Hello aqua friends, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing these Paul Ruebens 24 color floral watercolor paint set that I got sent. It has a beautiful pink sachet with their logo on it, and it is a pink metal case, which is super cute. Now the only thing is everything is in Chinese, and so I just went online to get the swatches and the names, and it did come with this piece of paper that you could do the swatches on. But I did decide that I was going to do bigger swatches using my own watercolor paper. I think it's important to use the paper that you usually do and to use the brushes that you usually use when you are trying out a new art supply. So the only thing different here is the paints. And so trying out these new paints, I have made all these swatches here, and I'm going to pre-wet them with a drop of clean water. Now I am not going to show you me swatching them out because obviously that part would be really boring, and there is already a couple of tutorials out there where they go through this step by step, but I'm going to save you that part. We're going to fast forward this. Some of my favorite warm colors were the permanent orange yellow and Indian yellow. Their peach light is basically a ochre pink. So basically when I go about swatching, I was trying to get a very, very dark amounts at the very top and soften the bottom edge. The nickel yellow is gorgeous. It does remind me of quinacridone gold. I was very impressed with the permanent violet, how dark you could get it, and it could almost pass for a black in its most thickest form. So once I let that whole thing dried, I decided just to kind of show you how these compare to some very expensive watercolors. Most of my watercolors are either Holbein, which I use mostly Holbein, but I do have quite a few Daniel Smiths now. I'm really starting to like that brand. And then I also have the Winsor & Newton. Now those are all professional watercolors, and comparing them to this Paul Ruebens set, I have to say I was very impressed with the luminosity of these paints and how creamy and how well that they went on. Comparing the Paul Ruebens Permanent Lemon, it was most similar to my Daniel Smith Indian Yellow, but I think the Paul Ruebens was even brighter. It was a very, very jewel tone color. So that really impressed me. I do have a cadmium yellow Holbein that was similar to the permanent yellow medium. As far as this gorgeous jewel tone permanent orange yellow, I guess my closest would be the cadmium red orange, but it still didn't have that same luminosity that the Paul Ruebens did. I also had quinacridone sienna, again, not the same luminosity. Transparent Pyrrole Orange by Daniel Smith came close, but I still favorite the permanent orange yellow. Now this gorgeous Indian yellow by Paul Ruben comes very, very close to my Aussie red gold by Daniel Smith. So the Chinese red is a very warm red. The closest I could get would be the Pyrrole red that I have from Daniel Smith. And here is the ochre pink. My Winsor & Newton and the Holbein are pretty much identical, as well as the ochre pink from the Paul Ruebens, which is actually called the Peach Light. I didn't really find it peachy at all. I found it very pink. The Rose Red is very similar to Permanent Rose and Quinacridone Red. So those would be my comparisons to that. Now the magenta from the Paul Ruebens is quite pretty, and the closest that I had in my own palette was quinacridone violet, but it's nowhere near as pretty as the Paul Ruebens violet. I kind of thought that it was odd that in the palette this yellow followed the reds and they didn't keep the yellow with the yellows. The nickel yellow is very, very similar to my quinacridone gold. I love, love, love this lavender violet from Paul Ruben, And the only thing similar I have to that would be the Holbein Lavender. The Permanent Violet from Paul Ruebens pretty much reminds me of my Holbein Permanent Violet, but not as dark. Cobalt blues are quite similar across the board. I have a cobalt blue from Daniel Smith, a cobalt blue from Holbein, and then beside that is the Paul Ruebens cobalt blue. So you can see that they are very similar. The next one from Paul Ruebens, the French Ultramarine, does remind me a lot of the ultramarine blue that I have from Daniel Smith. Paul Ruebens Sea Blue is a very nice warm blue, and it's similar to my phthalo blue yellow shade, but not as dark. Indigos are very, very similar. The Turquoise Light is very similar to my Horizon Blue by Holbein. But interestingly, also looking at what these colors are made of, the Holbein is made up of 2 or 3 different pigments, whereas the Paul Ruebens is only one pigment to get that same color. The Paul Ruebens Permanent Green is quite lovely. There is nothing too similar that I have in my palette except for this leaf green, but it still doesn't match up. The Emerald Green Light is kind of similar to Viridian Hue. I feel like it's a good mix of Hooker's Green and Viridian Hue. If I mix those two colors together, I would kind of get this Emerald Green Light. But again, it is only a single pigment. Their Hooker's Green Brilliant by Paul Ruebens is very similar to my Sap Green, but not as dark. The Olive Green from Paul Ruebens is more brown than my Winsor & Newton Olive Green. Now, this is the one that I really didn't care for too much. It is a lot like a burnt sienna, but the application didn't go on very smoothly, and I found it a little chalky. The browns are very similar to my Van Dyke Brown, Ambers, and Sepias that I have from Holbein and Daniel Smith. So now I am going to take my favorite colors from this Paul Ruebens set, and instead of doing florals though, I am going to do a landscape. I'm going to do a sunset and use my favorite jewel tone warm colors that are in this palette. Like I said, I think these colors are beautiful and they can be used for a lot more than just flowers. And I can use my favorite color is the permanent orange yellow. And that's going to be most of what the sky is going to be made up of. So I'm going to work wet on wet. I'm just wetting my paper really well. Now I do want the sun to be super bright, so I masked out that little area. Okay, I do have lots of water on my paper because it's buckled quite a bit. So I'm going to start with the lighter warm color that's above the sun here. It does go on really nice and smooth. And I'm going to pick up some of that darkest reddest color which I'm seeing underneath the sun. Now there is going to be a reflection of these colors on the water. It's going to be like a mixture of some of the blue, but also this peachy color. And then it's super bright here where the sun is reflecting. It's quite nice and bright. As far as the spreadability of this, I don't think there is a lot of different like binders. It makes it move around a lot. It stays put pretty much where you put it, kind of like the Holbeins, which I like that about Holbeins. So I got that mountain range in there. For putting in the blues, I am going to wait till this dries because I want to kind of do a dry brushing effect and see how that works for over top of the lake part here. So now we're going to add the blue. Like I said, I'm using a very desaturated blue because the local colors of the painting are very warm. So I can't have anything really bright blue down here. It wouldn't look right. So we're going to use mostly, like I said, the indigo. Just want to see how that comes on. Yeah. Okay, that looks pretty good. Kind of want, like I said, like kind of a very sort of dry, brushy effect here. And we have bands that are darker. So I take some pigment, but then I also wipe it off on my rag. So you get these marks. You get like a dry brushing effect. Now I can take off this. In the foreground, there's all these really pretty tall sea grasses, and I have various size script liner brushes I think would do a good job for that. And I'm just going to be using the indigo for this. Indigo, and I can even mix a little sepia in there. Get my sepia wet. So just trying to make some bent over, some tall ones. And then to steady your hand, you could take your other hand and lean it against, like if I wanted to continue with some seagrass little strands on the top of this one. It just helps to stabilize your hand. So kind of like the more you make, the more kind of realistic it looks. So for this Paul Ruben watercolor paint set, you get 24 of these vivid floral colors, and it comes in at $44.99. I am going to have the links for you guys, the links that the company gave me as well to use on their website, and that's going to be in the description of my video. So check that out and go get yourself some of these beautiful watercolors, and I would love to see what you're creating. I think this turned out so cute. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.